Elia Jones had been dreaming about her trip to New York for what felt like a lifetime. The small-town girl from northern Iowa had never been to the bustling city and was itching to experience all it had to offer. So when she finally completed a tough work project, she knew it was time to pack her bags and embark on the adventure of a lifetime. Part of the reason Elia was so eager to get away was that she had recently gone through a tough breakup. The pain was still fresh, and Elia was in desperate need of a change of scenery. On the other hand, Oscar Herricks, who grew up in a wealthy family, was used to luxury from an early age. Unlike Elia, Oscar had never had to worry about money or work, and he took his privileged life for granted. Elia's background was very different from Oscar's. Her father had passed away in a car accident when she was just a child, and her mother had worked tirelessly to provide for her daughter ever since. Despite the challenges, Elia had excelled in school and was one of the brightest students in her class. Her hard work paid off when she was accepted into college, where her professors quickly took note of her ambition and determination. Elia set her sights on an economics degree, hoping to make her mother proud and build a successful career for herself. And she did just that, eventually becoming a successful businesswoman with a great income and a fancy car. However, her personal life was a different story. As Elia experienced the vibrant streets of New York, she couldn't help but wonder if the trip would give her the fresh start she needed in her love life. Would she meet someone new and exciting, or would she return home to the same old routine? Only time would tell, but one thing was certain: Elia was ready for whatever the future had in store for her. Elia's breakup. Elia was a hopeless romantic. Her belief in magic and fairy tales had been with her since childhood, and she held on to it tightly even as she grew older. So when she met Oscar, a charismatic womanizer, she was swept off her feet. Oscar's smooth talk and charming ways were like a spell, and Elia found herself falling deeper and deeper under his spell. But what Elia didn't know was that Oscar was not a believer in magic. Instead, he had a very materialistic outlook on life and was only interested in playing with Elia's heart. After a few months of dating, Oscar abruptly suggested they break up. To Elia, it felt like the rug had been pulled out from under her. She was heartbroken and didn't know how to cope with the sudden loss of someone she had trusted and loved so deeply. Thankfully, Elia had a loving and wise mother named Maria. Seeing her daughter's pain, Maria knew that she had to do something to help her heal. So she surprised Elia with a ticket to New York, the city of dreams that Elia had always wanted to visit. The trip to New York. Elia was feeling down after the heartbreak caused by Oscar. All she wanted to do was to be left alone and forget about him. But her mother, Maria, wouldn't let her stay in that state. She suggested the trip to help her daughter forget about the past and to move on. Elia agreed to go, but instead of flying, she chose to travel by train. The journey was long, but she enjoyed every moment of it. And when they finally arrived in New York, Elia was ecstatic. She had always wanted to see the Statue of Liberty, and now she finally had the chance to see it with her own eyes. She was proud of her country, where she was born and raised. As they walked around the city, Elia was amazed by the bright neon lights that illuminated the streets and the bustling crowds of tourists. But the one place that truly stole her heart was Central Park. It was a beautiful oasis in the midst of the city's concrete jungle. Elia loved every inch of it and decided to explore it on a rented bike. As she rode through the park, Elia was in awe of the natural beauty around her. The pain of the breakup with Oscar slowly faded into the background as she immersed herself in the moment. The bike ride was a refreshing change of pace, and Elia was grateful to her mother for suggesting the trip. In the end, Elia realized that the trip had been the perfect remedy for her broken heart. She was grateful to her mother for pulling her out of her depressive state and showing her that there was more to life than just heartbreak. A fateful encounter. As the young woman strolled through the city streets, she was completely mesmerized by the grandeur of the buildings that surrounded her. The intricacy of the architecture and the hustle and bustle of the city had her completely absorbed in her own world. Suddenly, a young homeless man crossed her path, But Elia was so engrossed in the majesty around her that she didn't even see him. The next thing she knew, she heard a loud thud and felt herself colliding with something. It was the homeless man. Elia was quick to jump up and apologize for not paying attention, but the homeless man was incredibly gracious and understanding. As they lay on the soft grass that grew on the sides of the alleyway, Elia couldn't help but find the situation a bit comical. Neither of them knew what to say, and they just lay there in silence for a few moments. Finally, the homeless man, whose name was Kyle, was the first to break the silence. He got up and dusted himself off, and Elia noticed just how shabby and old his clothes looked. She couldn't help but feel sorry for him. When Kyle apologized for the collision, Elia couldn't believe how kind he was being. They introduced themselves to each other, and Elia extended her hand to Kyle. As he held her tiny hand in his huge palm, Elia felt drawn to this man who had fallen on hard times. She was grateful that he wasn't angry with her, and she couldn't wait to get to know him better. Kyle's passed. The sun beat down on the busy street, casting a hot and oppressive atmosphere on the bustling city. Two young people, unbeknownst to themselves, struck up a conversation and meandered over to a bench nestled in the shade of a century-old elm tree. Elia found herself intrigued by Kyle's eloquence and vast knowledge of various topics, hinting at a well-educated past. Curiosity got the better of Elia, and she couldn't resist asking Kyle the question burning in her mind. How did a man like him end up on the streets? Kyle's face contorted with pain, and Elia sensed his reluctance to share his story. Eventually, he mustered up the courage to confide in her. It turned out that Kyle's upbringing had not been easy. He grew up in a poor family, his mother dying in childbirth, leaving his father to raise him alone. Mason Roberts, Kyle's father, never quite recovered from the loss of his wife and turned to alcohol as a coping mechanism. Despite his addiction, Mr. Roberts loved his son and devoted his life to providing for him, but it wasn't enough. At just 13 years old, Kyle began working part-time at a car wash, and by 15, he was an auxiliary worker at a construction site, all while studying hard and reading extensively. Kyle's father passed away when he was just 22 years old, still working at the construction site and dreaming of college. Elia listened intently to Kyle's story, feeling a mix of emotions. She admired his resilience, hard work, and dedication to education, despite the odds stacked against him. It was a tale of heartache, triumph, and tragedy, and Elia knew it was a story she would never forget. Kyle's life was a tumultuous one, filled with highs and lows that could have broken any man. As an orphan, he refused to give up and strove for success in both his work and studies. But then, a woman came along, and everything else in the world paled in comparison. Sadly, the relationship ended in betrayal, leaving Kyle shattered and struggling to cope. He turned to alcohol to numb the pain, unaware that he was unconsciously following in his father's footsteps. Disaster struck when he lost his home to a fire and quit his job, spiraling him into a life of homelessness. At that time, Kyle was earning a living by collecting cardboard and glass for recycling. But even though he'd given up on alcohol, he'd found it hard to return to a normal life. However, he found solace in sharing his life story with Elia, who listened with empathy and without judgment. "You've been through so much, but you're still young. You can always start afresh," Elia said, choosing her words carefully. Kyle shrugged his shoulders, replying, "There's no point in thinking about that now. You can't change the past." The date. "Since you're in New York, I simply have to show you around personally," said Kyle. The corners of Elia's lips curled up mischievously as she continued, "Are you asking me out on a date?" Kyle's cheeks turned a deep shade of red, clearly taken aback by the unexpected question. However, after a moment of hesitation, he nodded his head in agreement. With Elia staying in the city for 3 days, Kyle became her very own tour guide, showcasing the most beautiful and exciting places that New York had to offer. The chemistry between the two was undeniable, and they found themselves enjoying each other's company more and more as the days went by. As the time came for Elia to return home to northern Iowa, the two exchanged phone numbers. "If you get bored or sad, "Call me and I'll help you out," Elia said, handing Kyle a folded piece of paper. "Thank you. I'll definitely call you," Kyle replied in a trembling voice. As they said their goodbyes, the young couple stood in silence, unsure of what to say. Finally, they hugged, exchanged friendly kisses on the cheek, and said goodbye timidly, hoping that this wouldn't be the end of their story. The turnaround. Half an hour had passed since Elia boarded the bus that would take her away from New York, the city of dreams. She couldn't help but feel a sense of melancholy wash over her as she reflected on the last 3 days that had completely transformed her outlook on life. During her time there, Elia had come to a powerful realization that one should never give up or despair in the face of adversity. And spending time with Kyle had stirred up the most romantic feelings she'd ever experienced. Even now, as she gazed out the window at the passing scenery, the memory of his warmth and tenderness lingered in her heart. Yet despite her fond memories, Elia knew that the chances of Kyle reaching out to her were slim to none. Still, she found herself constantly checking her phone, hoping against hope that he would keep her promise and call her. Months passed in a blur, and Elia had already come to the terms with the fact that they would never cross paths again. But then, out of the blue, Kyle called. She couldn't believe her ears when he told her that he had traveled a long way just to see her in person. And when they finally met, Elia was stunned by the transformation that had taken place. Gone was the scruffy, disheveled young man that she had once known. Instead, he stood before her as a handsome, well-groomed model in a sharp business suit and dress shoes. As they caught up, Elia realized that Kyle had indeed turned his life around, and her heart swelled with happiness and pride for the man he'd become. "Kyle, is that really you?" Ellie whispered in disbelief. "Yes, it's me. I found a good job, and I want you to come with me," Kyle replied with a smile. At first, Elia thought it was a joke, but when she looked into Kyle's eyes, she realized he was serious. Her heart swelled with joy, and she struggled to hold back happy tears. Instead of feeling despair over their separation, Elia knew that she was doing the right thing by saying yes. 6 months later, they held a modest wedding, and a year after that, their first child was born. In a world where the unexpected can happen at any moment, the story of Kyle and Elia is a reminder to keep an open mind and heart. Their journey from an unlikely encounter to a happy family is a testament to the power of love and the magic of life. So, if you're feeling lost or discouraged, remember that anything is possible. Keep your eyes peeled for the unexpected and embrace new opportunities. Who knows what exciting adventures might be waiting for you just around that corner. If you enjoyed Kyle and Elia's story, share your thoughts in the comment section below. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more inspiring tales of hope, love, and the wonder of life.